Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this celebration for the 20th anniversary of the OSS. I'm on the right-hand side. My name is David Harp, and as one of the three amigos, as some of my colleagues sometimes say. Ariel Fencer is over here on the left-hand side, and Joe is over here on the right-hand side. And it's my task tonight to give you a short, not too long. Joe says I like to talk, so as you know, you get an academic in front of a microphone that's 45 minutes at minimum. But I want to tell you a little bit about how we got started in this endeavor. And it happened back in 1978. Now, that's not before some of you were born, although we say that to the students any number of times. And the chair came to me and said, would you like to investigate the possibility of having a special environmentally oriented display of chemistry at the former World's Fair site? As many of you remember, it carried on from 1967 for about 12 or 14 years. And I immediately started to backpedal and think of things that I didn't want to do it, and I said, well, I've got this and I've got that. Then he admitted that there was a good budget for it, and that the University of Montreal chemistry department had turned down the opportunity, and I thought this was our opportunity to do something. So I thought it would be appropriate to share the credit and share the work, which of course I was more worried about than the credit. And so I didn't know Joe and Ariel as very well at that point in time. They had just gotten their PhDs and had taken a position at Dawson College on Sherbrooke Street. So I contacted them, invited them to join me in this endeavor, and they immediately took up the task, and we did it. And that was the former World's Fair site, where about half of the pavilions were active. And the pavilion that we were assigned to was the UNESCO pavilion. It was UNESCO and the City of Montreal that put on this show. And as you see, it has Cinema 360 on the right-hand side. So we had the fortunate circumstance of having the audience go into a 360-degree movie, surround sound and everything, and then come into our part of the demonstration area. And we trained 7 students, all of whom are medical doctors right now, trained 7 students to give bilingual presentations, and they did a wonderful job for 2 separate summers. We gave a few presentations on the weekends, and they liked to do poofs and bangs and smoke and fire. And so they did all summer. There was a rocket that we had on a wire that really worked, and it was very good. We had a grandstand that held about 100 people. And so they were ensnared once they left the 360-degree movie, and we served about 80,000 people over the 2 summers. Also, we captured this one picture where you see in the upper right-hand side Jean Drapeau, Mayor of Montreal, for those not familiar, Pierre Elliott Trudeau to his immediate right, and this young gentleman, whom you can only guess as to who he is, the present Prime Minister. So he didn't go into science, but he at least seemed to enjoy the show. Well, that publicity that we got for doing that for the 2 summers gave us some invitations. We had our first invited lectures were in Stewart Hall on the West Island, and so we presented those, and that we found to be workable. We were interested in working with each other. It gave Joe the opportunity to join CJAD in the day, and he's had the longest running, we think it's the longest running radio show in the world. Entering the 40th year, and of course we contend that nobody's going to challenge that, and so we say it but it is not fake news. It's really pretty much the truth. It also gave him an opportunity to be on television, and because of the remarks that were made on the radio show, talking about food, talking about medications, the environment, and the like. And that engaged us to start some evening public lectures. And in this room, and it's reminiscent of it, we haven't done them for some years, but over 20 years, we did 70 evening public lectures that lasted about 90 minutes. And we pretty much filled it, not maybe quite as much every single time, but one of the events was the title of and these are the placards that you see up on the wall, which we proudly show in the office. Nobody reads them because they're high up on the wall, but we see them now and then. One of the events was on a May night, beautiful weather, and the title of the lecture was Aging, Who Needs It? And I'm not kidding you at all. Every single space was filled. I was supposed to come up and be after I think Joe led off that night, and I was to come second. I had to stand over there in the corner like this because there were so many people up and down the aisles. We violated every fire code that's possible, but it worked. And the engagement of those lectures permitted us to find out a lot about what we didn't know at the beginning, not organic chem level, but at the beginning level of a world of chemistry courses, Chemistry in the Modern World, which changed its name. And we evolved 4 McGill courses, one on food, one on drugs, one on the environment, and one on technology. And over 42,000 students have taken these courses since that era of 1982 to the present time. Throughout all of this period, and many of you may have seen this, Joe and Ariel had started a Magic of Chemistry show, which is a stage show, which we've performed in here a number of times, with the Magic of Chemistry and show. And we did it about over 200 times all over Canada and in many places in the US. It had slides, a storyline, magic tricks, chemistry demonstrations, and music to go with the chemistry demonstrations. I was the music coordinator for sound management, bad pun, but it's what it was. And I think the highlight of our career here was giving this at the embassy, Canadian Embassy in Washington in 1993. And there you see the placard, and there we were. I'll take credit for making them get into tuxedos. I had one, and I had never worn it, so I thought if I can do that, they can get one too. And then and this is at the same night, Ariel used to have this demonstration where he had a book, and he'd talk about chemistry being a hot topic because it caught fire. And I think this is taken from just about the last one that we did as a McGill adventure, and it's shown right here a few years later. But as you can see, we haven't aged a bit in the entire time. Well, all of what that did was to bring the media to the OSS office, which is just across the hall. And so it was very commonly found to see that there would be a TV camera, and Ariel or Joe in front of it answering a question from the public and the like. So that's the origin of how we got together, but that's not the origin of the office. The origin of the office took place in the spring of 1999. I attended a McGill lecture, not a McGill lecture, but a McGill dinner, and to my left sat a gentleman who had a PhD in microbiology, and he was involved as his job in the area in that general area in a Montreal company. And after a few minutes, he said, "You know, I took your World of Chemistry course." And so I don't know what I said. I guess, "Oh, that's nice. I hope you passed." And what he said was an unusual remark. He said, "It was the most useful course I took at McGill." And he was in a biotech company, high up in the biotech company, with a PhD in microbiology. And I thought that was an interesting remark. I had never heard that. I've heard that's a nice course. We enjoyed the course, or it was a complicated course, and I guess I enjoyed it. I don't know. We get various remarks, but most of it's pretty positive. A week later, I was at the Leacock luncheon, and to my right, and I remember just where these people were sitting because it was astounding to me what she said. She was getting her PhD in pharmacology. And she said, you know, I took your course in World of Chemistry. And I thought, oh, okay, another one. That's good. And she said, it was the most useful course I took at McGill. And I had not heard that remark made either before or even since in all of these years. And so I thought, somebody's trying to tell me something. So I thought it would be, we had always talked a little bit about trying to coalesce ourselves at McGill because Joe and Ariel were teaching at Vanier College at that time. But they had to come down and go back and come down and go back. And so I called up Joe because he had a prominent name, certainly, with respect to the TV and his radio show and his columns. And I said, would you like to come to McGill? And it took him all of maybe 10 seconds to answer. It certainly wasn't very long. He didn't deliberate. And I said, well, let's see if we can do this. And it was fortunate timing because I was chair of the department in chemistry at that time. A close colleague in chemistry was dean of science. An even closer colleague in chemistry also was the VP academic. And so I tried the ideas out on them, and eventually they coalesced to it rather quickly, actually. And then we spent some time talking to the principal, Bernard Shapiro, about could we start this? Didn't ask for anything special, just said we have space, we'd like to start this Office for Science and Society. We called it actually Office for Chemistry and Society initially. He said fine, so we went ahead and we had an opening in September of 1999. So we thought, how are we going to open this? Should we have a ribbon-cutting ceremony? Well, we decided it had to be a little bit chemistry-oriented, and I have to put on safety glasses. So what we decided to do was to make a kind of a chain or a ribbon of nitrocellulose paper. Some of you know what nitrocellulose paper does when you catch a flame to it. And as Joe said, they always like to see it twice. So I situated myself down low in the office in front of this ribbon of nitrocellulose paper when the principal came, not with a scissors, but with a candle. And I just wished I had waited maybe 1.5 or 2 seconds more, although he seemed nonplussed about the whole thing. It's like, okay, so we get a flame. We didn't tell him, and that's the nitrocellulose paper. But he enjoyed it, and we enjoyed it, and we opened up as of that date that you see, September 17th, 1999. Shortly thereafter, LORNE TROTTIER, who has benefited McGill in numerous ways, came on for us with an endowment that has enabled the office to move as it has. And presently, Ariel has just retired from Vanier, or from the office. We were able to get him to come to the office and have a salary and the like. And as we have moved ahead with everything, we have enabled a number of other people, including Adam Brown, Professor Adam Brown, who's here somewhere. Oh, in the front row. He came from Ottawa. He's a biology professor, and he contributes to the OSS. Chris Lobos is here next to him. He contributes articles, as many of you probably know, and Ada McVeigh. Ada is somewhere, I'm not so sure.
She's in the lab.
She's in the lab, working, exactly. She's coming. And so we've got a pretty good team going right now. And so what I want to do is introduce Jonathan Jerry, who's our newest member of the staff. And he's going to conduct the opening for Joe and all of our other invited speakers. And we're all set to go. So come on up. Thank you very much.
All right.
right. Thank you very much, David. So we took a trip down to the past, and now I want to talk about the present, the kind of the landscape that we find ourselves into when it comes to science, when it comes to what we call fake news, and the future as well. And so we brought you 4 amazing speakers who will give very short 10-minute talks, and I will keep them to that time. On various topics that pertain to the work that we do, and then I will be moderating a panel discussion with these fantastic people. So the first speaker that I want to introduce needs no introduction, though I will introduce him anyway. He is the director of the McGill Office for Science and Society. He is the recipient of numerous awards for his science communication. He is the host of the Dr. Joe Show on CJAD Radio. He's a columnist for the Montreal Gazette, the author of many books. I give you Dr. Joe Schwarcz.
Thanks very much. You know, when Dave said about the longest-running radio show, I usually phrase it a little bit different. I say it's the longest-running radio show on chemistry in the history of the world. But it is also the only chemistry show in the history of the world. So I can cherry-pick data with the best of them. Anyway, our office logo, as you know, is separating sense from nonsense. What is nonsense? Well, unfortunately, there's a lot of it out there today. Basically, for us, it's pseudoscience. It's a belief in things that really cannot be corroborated by science. And unfortunately, these days, it's a scary world out there because there is just so much of this. There's a tsunami of information and misinformation coming at us. And sometimes it feels like science is just being overrun by the quacks. Which brings us to ducks. Have you noticed anything about ducks? I do collect them, and people ask me, why do you collect ducks? Why do you have this amazing duck collection? I say because they represent everything that is wrong with science. Quackery is the opposite of science. And it's nice to be surrounded by these reminders that we have to stay on track and abide by the scientific method. Because if we don't, there's real danger out there. And there's so much misinformation, as you well know. People think that if they graduated the University of Google, that's enough knowledge to run their lives. My background, as is Dave's and Ariel's, is chemistry, so we do gravitate towards chemical discussions. And I kind of think that chemistry is the central science, is the thread that ties all the other sciences together. Because if you have a feel for what molecules are all about and what they can and cannot do, you have a pretty good idea about how the world works. And it is a confusing world out there, isn't it? Because we seem to get information that is contradictory. One day, eggs are good, the next day they're not. One day it's butter, the next day it's margarine. Well, we deal with all kinds of questions of a practical nature, many of them from a chemical point of view. There are a lot of people who are worried about microwaves. Oh, of course, they're worried about electromagnetic radiation. But more these days, they're worried about the sort of cooking in the microwave oven and whether the plastic that is in there is safe or not. And I give you a quick little story here of how we go about this, how we try to explain the science behind it. For example, there was an email going around, and I had lots of questions about this, about heating up food in plastic containers in the microwave oven because it resulted in the release of dioxin. Dioxin is a notoriously dangerous chemical. It's a chlorinated compound. It has 4 chlorine atoms in its molecular structure. And the story in the email was that this chemical is released when you heat this plastic in the microwave oven. Well, the fact is that that would be actually a theoretical possibility if these containers were made of PVC, polyvinyl chloride. If you would heat that up to a very high temperature, in theory, you could get the release of dioxin. However, there is no polyvinyl chloride ever used in microwave containers. Polyvinyl chloride is used elsewhere. This plastic bag that you can buy at Macy's for $3,500 is made of PVC. And indeed, if you were to incinerate it at 1700 degrees, which you might not want to do with a $3,500 bag, you could, in theory, get release of dioxin. But your microwave oven is not an incinerator, and the temperature does not rise above the boiling point of water. And these containers are made of polyethylene or polypropylene. These do not contain any chlorine, and therefore it is impossible for these to form any kind of dioxin. Now, when we go through this and explain this to people, I think they get it, because you can show the molecular structure, you see that it contains chlorine, tell them that this one doesn't contain chlorine, so how could you possibly get dioxin? That's a pretty easy one to deal with. And there are ones that are more difficult. Let me introduce you to PMAT. It's a miracle, because it will cure almost every disease that you have ever heard of. And the literature comes along with it. You learn about neo-energy and about how you can concentrate the energy of the universe into the human body, although science has not caught up to this, as you see. It's not known to science, but of course they know it. Let me introduce you to PMAT. This is PMAT. It is a piece of cotton fabric, but it has these red dots on it in a very specific pattern. And it is that geometric design that performs the miracle. How? Well, you sleep on it. You put it under your back. You get cured while you sleep. Well, two ladies who brought this back from Poland came to me, and they wanted my opinion on it. And I thought that here was an occasion for a good chemistry lesson. So I said, look, this is what we're going to do. Because I had access to a senior population. I do a monthly lecture at the Coatzain Public Library, so I thought I could enlist some volunteers because all of them are in pain of some kind. So I said, listen, here's what we're going to do. We're going to take the PMAT and we're going to have a placebo PMAT, which of course would be just a cotton piece of fabric without the magical dots on it. But in order for people not to know which one they're sleeping on, we would have to put these into a bag that would be coded. And believe it or not, the company that manufactured this in Poland agreed to this. And they did it for us. They did it. And we had these samples. So we had people fill out forms for 2 weeks about how they slept. And then for the next 2 weeks, they slept either on PMAT or on the placebo. And for 2 weeks after that, we switched. So we had a pretty good trial. And as you can imagine, the results were no difference, except the difference between the first 2 weeks and the next 4 weeks. Tremendous difference. It didn't matter if they were sleeping on the active PMAT or the placebo PMAT, they got better. And that was very instructive for us, because I can tell you that some of these seniors were pretty active at night in ways that never imagined when they were sleeping on the PMAT. So the PMAT really did have something. It had a strong placebo embedded in it. Well, I've never slept on the PMAT actually, but this morning I just happened to look at my sheet that I do sleep on, and I noticed that it has it has these dots, but I haven't noticed that I'm sleeping any better. Now, if you think that PMAT is interesting, this one is even more interesting. This is a 0-point energy wand, 0-point energy wand, and it does everything that PMAT does. But it's $300. I thought that was a bit steep, but then I saw it on sale one day for $75. I thought that was worthwhile. I bought it. There it is, and I have it right here. What is it? It looks like a pen, except that the end where you normally would write is closed. I didn't know what it was. Maybe there was something in it. Maybe it gave off radiation or something. So I went to a friend of mine who's a dentist, and we x-rayed it. There's nothing in it but a crack. It is a piece of metal that cures, and it even cures remotely. You just have to wave it around like this. So you feel it right now? Your joints are better. Ariel can stand up even. So we deal with that kind of thing. But on a more serious level, not that this isn't serious, because a lot of people buy into this. We have had some success with homeopathy. We've been dealing with this for 40 years, trying to get people to realize what silliness this is, that when you're buying a homeopathic pill, you're buying nothing but sugar. That's what it is. The solution is diluted to the extent that it's not a single molecule of the original left, not that the original would have any kind of sense behind it anyway. But we have had some success thanks to Jonathan's recent work. And now in pharmacies, some pharmacies, voluntarily, they are now posting these signs showing that there is actually no science behind this. We'll see what this does in terms of marketing and whether or not people stay away from it. So I think we have had some success in showing people that things are not always the way that they appear to be. But as far as countering all of the fake news that is out there, I'm not sure that we're going to be able to stop it. But we sure are going to give it a good old-fashioned try.
Thank you very much. All right, let me see if I can pull up the right slides here. There we go. Our next speaker is the health reporter for the Globe and Mail newspaper. She has recently written about vaccine misinformation, about upcoming changes to the packaging of tobacco products, the platforming and deplatforming of a notorious anti-vaccination activist at a major health event. She will be talking to us about the democratization of information and news sharing and the rise of social media. I bring you Carly Weeks.
Thank you, and it's really exciting to be here. And to advance, Jonathan, just the mouse?
Sorry. Yes, the mouse.
Perfect. So I'm here to talk about fake news, and this is something I know a little bit about as a reporter for the Globe and Mail. So I thought I would just jump right in. So this is a sampling of the type of feedback that I'm getting these days on Twitter when I post a story saying that vaccines are effective and that vaccines work, or stories that talk about a mother whose son died as a result of the flu and is urging others to get their vaccines. And I post this not to garner sympathy or to generate sort of any goodwill, because after a few years in this business, you develop a pretty thick skin. But the reason I point this out is because this is just a flavor of the sort of thing that we're up against. When we talk about the intersection of misinformation, news, and health, this has serious consequences and implications for everybody. And as we can see from the recent outbreaks of measles that have been having such an impact in countries in Europe, in the US, and of course in Canada, it's something that we all have a vested interest in. The idea, and I focus a lot lately in my reporting on vaccinations, and simply because I think that this is an area that we do need to be highlighting a lot more. There are a lot of people out there who really do believe that the medical profession is out to get them. You know, everyone here, I think, is in agreement that vaccines do work, that we need to counter these messages. And so it's really exciting that I think we're at a time, there's an opportunity here to really confront these messages and find out new ways to address them. And that's something that I'm hoping we can talk a little bit more about tonight. But as you can see, I mean, this is not just a small group of people anymore. It's not just a fringe. I did some reporting recently. There are some really good numbers out of Ontario that show that over 10% of some counties in Ontario, some areas, more than 10% of school-age children in the 7-year-old bracket are not up to date with their vaccinations. So just think about that. You know, more than 10%. And that's just at the minimum. Public health officials there say it's, really surprising that there hasn't been an outbreak of measles in those areas and that it's just a matter of time. And so I say those things not to sort of be sensationalist or to scare, but to sort of say that there's obviously something wrong and there's something that we need to correct because we're clearly not getting those messages. And I say we being the media and people who work in healthcare not getting the correct messages out, and there is a loss of faith that's going on. So this used to be how people got their news. This is a front page newspaper that hangs in the offices of the Globe and Mail. You can probably see the outline of me, which I took this photo of my iPhone yesterday. And this is June 6, 1944. The Allies are landing, and signaling near the end of the Second World War. You used to have to actually get your newspaper or, listen to the radio to hear what was going on. Now, anyone with an internet connection is a publishing house. And what this means, it's journalists are no longer the gatekeepers of information. It used to be, you could say whatever you wanted, but at the end of the day, most people got their information from a couple of different sources. You'd go to your doctor, you'd go to someone that you trust, you read the newspaper, which used to be very trusted. Now journalists are among the least trusted professions that are out there. So there's obviously been a very significant change that's happened. So what does that look like? Well, it looks like extreme nature health news, which I'm sure is right up there with the New York Times in terms of its credibility. So this is a news site of sorts that claims in this particular post that it's not actually the asthma symptoms that might kill you, it's the medication. And so you should really try to manage those pesky asthma symptoms with juice. And these are the types of things that are out there and people believe them. And why? These are not just, stupid people. It's easy to say, well, anyone who believes in this is obviously a moron. Let's just move on. And if they want to hurt themselves, that's their problem. It's a lot bigger than that. And the measles outbreaks that we're seeing show that. Another example, our buddy Mercola. Someone who is just the scourge of public health everywhere. Here he's saying it's not, the symptoms of ADHD, thyroid problems, and everything else can really be traced back to the fluoride debate. Fluoride being another favorite boogeyman that will just never disappear, along with the idea that vaccines don't work. Why do I bring this up? Because he has this following. I get people in my life forwarding me his clips and his advice. There's people who are really buying into what he's selling, which is frightening. So what does that look like in the real world? Well, we've seen what happens with measles, but it also happens with stem cell clinics that are popping up, all over Canada, Southern Ontario. This is a recent story from the CBC, basically sounding the alarm, that people are going out and treating themselves with unproven stem cell therapies that literally have no evidence. Can stem cells help some people? Sure, there's a potentially limited benefit here. That's something that needs to be studied more. There's limited applications right now, maybe more hope for the future, but there's something really going wrong here. And if we want to really focus on, I guess, the extent of the problem, I would say that this guy is a good example of if you want to just think about what's going wrong, look at this guy's webpage. So I don't know if you can see, but this recent podcast of his, he can't even spell dummies right, by the way. That apparently doesn't matter. This has 117,000 views. This guy is good. So I first heard of Del Bigtree a few months ago because he was supposed to come to Toronto to speak at the Total Health Show, which is like a health and wellness show, which actually is just apparently a guise to bring in people that just spout some very, very wrong ideas about things. So he was supposed to come. I heard about it. I contacted him to say, why are you coming? Why do you spread these false ideas about vaccines? And so we wrote the story, and he got kicked out of the conference, and hundreds of people were protesting and wrote me terrible, nasty things, same sort of flavor as you saw earlier. So I sort of saw the force that he is, the fan base that he has. He's also the guy, I should point out, who wore the yellow star recently to say that the victims, the anti-vaccination movement, are victims similar to the people that were in the Holocaust. And he believes that, and that's just sickening. But he has an audience. Every week he has a podcast. He has thousands and thousands of people listening. So I go back to this interview that I did with him. To my surprise, he comes out with a podcast a few days later. So when I called him up and said, I need to get your take, why are you, we don't contact people in the anti-vaccination movement anymore. There was once upon a time we were told to do this. We don't do that anymore. It's false balance. But given that this story was really just about him and the fact that he was being kicked out of this conference, it was our due diligence to contact him. So he basically took this opportunity to have a colleague of his videotape himself doing the interview with me. So it's like an interview within an interview. So to my surprise, I check out his podcast, which is all about me the next week, and he's interviewed our entire conversation, and he's playing selective clips for his audience and whipping up the outrage machine. I've been taken out of context, and look at this. And he realized what great publicity this could be for him. He never contacted me and said, you got this wrong, you misquoted me, I demand a correction. No, he just used this because this is how good these people are at what they're doing. While, people in public health have been spending their time figuring out how best to deliver programs and how to make the system work better and how to care about people and make them better, the people on the other side that want to undermine public health have been very busy figuring out how to take the most advantage of the click and share culture that we live in, how to get the most clicks, shares, retweets, likes, and they're succeeding. And so once you get a sliver of doubt in your mind about something like a vaccine, it's very easy to start believing in these types of things. Maybe you subscribe to Mr. Big Tree's podcast. From there, it's just a matter of time. You really start to buy into these theories, I'll just say, without an adjective. This is an article that was published in 1992 from a medical historian. She was looking back, her name's Catherine Arnott, and she did an article looking back at the anti-vaccination movement from the early 1900s. This passage really struck me. It's a great article if you can look it up, 1992, Arnott. But in here, basically, the chief medical officer at the time was responding to a smallpox outbreak in Toronto, 1919. An anti-vaccination group had published a big advertisement in a local newspaper saying, vaccinations are bad and no one should be getting these, they're going to kill you. Similar sort of to what we're dealing with today. And the medical officer says, basically, these people are ignoramuses, this is too childish to even respond to. I would argue that the response from public health in many ways hasn't really evolved from there. This idea that, if we engage with these people who are purveying the false news, we're just giving them a platform. We're giving them oxygen. It's the worst thing that we can do. We need to just pretend they're not there and they're going to go away. But while we've been doing that, they've just been getting better at what they're doing. So we went from having vaccine advertisements that looked like this, smiling little baby, go get vaccinated, to a couple of decades later, something like this, who needs a flu vaccine? You do. Doctor knows best, trust us. We don't need to explain or provide any context. This is the information and the facts that make sense. And if you want some fact-based information on why vaccines work, check out this graphic. It's just clear as night and day. If you come away still believing the vaccines don't work, there's something wrong with you, right? Except when you're looking at today's click and share culture and you're scrolling through your phone and there's a million things going on around you, are you going to stop and look at this? Or are you going to look at this? Look at what these medical professionals are doing to this poor child. I took this image from an anti-vaccination website. I feel it's important to be transparent about that, given that recently an anti-vaccination website used the image of a girl who died from cancer in Newfoundland to promote their cause. So this was, I don't know who this girl is or her backstory, but this idea of fear and division, this is what's being used, scaring people into believing that vaccinations are going to kill their kids. So we're talking about people in the middle who, they're not stupid, they're worried about their kids, they see something online, they start to believe it. They don't necessarily have time to do more research, but they're saying, well, this must be an authority because it's out there, right? Makes sense. Luckily, we're seeing more public health start to push back on this. This is a recent campaign that I saw on the CDC's Facebook page. Here's a child with measles. That looks terrible. You don't need to say much more than that. But if you look at all of the comments on the side, they're all saying, oh, check out all the kids with autism. Why isn't the CDC look at that? CDC's jokes, they're liars, vaccines. And there's a comment right up there saying that this isn't even measles, it's like a vaccine reaction. And none of them are answered. The CDC doesn't respond. They're all still up there. So if you look at this image, do you come away with the idea that vaccines are safe and that measles is something we want to avoid, or do you still have more questions that are raised? So clearly, more work needs to be done there. I just wanted to leave with one last example of what we're talking about in this. This little boy is named Rhett Crowett. In 2015, he started a campaign with his family to get rid of personal belief exemptions in California. He was diagnosed with leukemia. He's in remission, and he still is, but he couldn't go to school because there was the Disneyland measles outbreak in California. So he and his family lobbied the California state to get rid of the personal belief exemption. They used his story, they used his personal narrative, and they were successful. And now California has one of the strongest they got rid of the personal belief exemptions. Now they have some of the strongest exemption policies in the states, and they're going to crack down apparently further on medical exemptions because they're being taken advantage of. So this is an example of how positive storytelling can start to turn that narrative around, and it's something that we need to see more of. So thanks for listening, and looking forward to the rest of the discussion.
All right, thank you very much, Carly. Our next speaker is drinking right now. He is the brand new executive director of Bad Science Watch, an independent, nonprofit consumer protection watchdog and science advocacy organization dedicated to improving the lives of Canadians by countering bad science. The organization has in the past pressured Health Canada to deregulate homeopathic vaccines, which are not vaccines, and has investigated anti-Wi-Fi activism in the country. He has a PhD in biomedical engineering. He blogs at Post-Truth Health, and he will be discussing something we don't talk about much in science communication, but which has a huge impact on the legitimization of questionable practices. I bring you Ryan Armstrong.
Wow, thanks a lot. What a wonderful introduction. So yeah, I'm going to be talking about my approach for a science misinformation detox. This thing works, right? Great. So not too long ago, my original passion was actually science communication. Don't let the slide fool you. I know very little about chemistry. Sorry to everyone at the OSS. But I worked as a teaching assistant, and I lectured, and I volunteered with educational nonprofits. But the more I got involved in my community, the more I found there were these professionals, these authorities, health professionals, who were also engaging in the community and lecturing on some very strange ideas about science and health. And they had very big platforms. So I thought, well, I should probably look into this. And what I found was really disturbing. So I found chiropractors, for example, who were selling spinal adjustments as essentially a cure-all for everything. And likewise, I was finding retailers of essential oils who were recommending it, again, for virtually any condition. Unfortunately, I've yet to come across an oil for promoting rational thinking. They should probably work on that. And it got worse and worse the more I looked into it. They have these massive platforms. So they were in my community, they were holding events like seminars and community dinners, and they were going to churches and schools. And they had a huge online presence. They had websites and social media sites. They're on Facebook and Twitter and Pinterest, and they were making YouTube videos, like a constant stream of these things. And of course, they're also in the clinic. And who knows what kind of misinformation they're disseminating to their actual patients when they're behind closed doors. And altogether, they were creating this vast network of misinformation. It was quite odd because a lot of these practitioners had philosophically incompatible beliefs, but they were still supporting each other in this network. They were creating a marketplace of misinformation, and nowhere was safe. The smoothie store is not safe. So, folks, I saw this book at a local Booster Juice in my town, and it's promoting 5 surprising ways to cure your leaky gut. I'm sure they're surprising because leaky gut is not a legitimate medical diagnosis. And likewise, Dr. Josh Axe is not a legitimate authority. He's not a medical expert. He's not a physician. He's not a scientist. He is a chiropractor and a naturopath. He's like a superhero at fighting non-existent toxins. And he's not alone. You know, all over the country, there are these professionals who are in positions of authority, and yet they're misleading the patient and they're misleading the public. And I mean, the irony is that they themselves are the real toxins here. And they're the toxins that are creating the epidemic that I refer to as misinformation toxicity. And so my prescription is a detox. We need to target the source, and this is how. This is the cure. So first, a bit of background information. So this is Canada. We know that. So that's basic stuff. And we have some actually pretty good consumer protection laws as far as laws in that domain go. So, for example, I can't sell you a device and say, this is a time machine. If you use this, you're going to go back in time. You can't do that. That's illegal. That's false advertising. So we have a number of provisions under deceptive marketing, and this is all enforced by a dedicated law enforcement agency, which is known as the Competition Bureau. So problem solved, right? Well, not quite. So when it comes to health products and services, they're typically regulated in their own privileged marketplaces because we recognize that they pose a unique risk to consumers. And so when it comes to health professionals and when it comes to health products, these have their own regulatory structures. And if you're wondering, these are legitimate quotes from practitioners in my town, and I'm ashamed on their behalf. Okay, so let's talk about these. So health products. We have a pretty simple system. We have, well, to an extent, Health Canada, and it's a national regulatory authority, and they regulate various health products, including medical devices and pharmaceuticals and natural health products, and their role is ensuring that Canadians have access to safe and effective products. And they actually do a pretty good job at this. But they don't do a perfect job. So when it comes to certain products, like when we're talking about natural health products, they have exemptions so that manufacturers can register products without any actual scientific evidence. Of course, this is the case with essential oils. And the more popular case that's probably going to keep coming up tonight, as it has, is homeopathy. You know, it's a product and it's a therapy for which not only is there no scientific evidence, but it's completely implausible, and yet Health Canada registers products anyways, implying that it is safe, which it is, it's water, but also implying that it's effective, right? So it's ridiculous. But when we're talking about regulated health professionals, it gets much more complicated. So unlike Health Canada, which is a single national regulator, the regulations vary from province to province. And to make things even more complicated, in most provinces, all of the professions are given the privilege to actually self-regulate themselves independently. So just in Ontario, these are the list, like this is all the regulators. And they all have different standards and guidelines and processes. And the worst part is that none of them are science-based, right? None of them are technically scientific authorities. They have no scientific standards, and they operate really on a different model. They operate on a model of expertise. But the problem is when you give them all the opportunity to self-regulate themselves independently, the expertise that they must defer to is their own. So when you have professions that have a pseudoscience endemic, like pseudoscientific philosophies that are very common, you know, in the naturopathy profession and in a chiropractic, it's really uncertain how the regulatory authority is going to act when practitioners are offering pseudoscience. And I mean, this case is very well illustrated by the difference between two provinces. So in British Columbia, there's actually been a recent crackdown by the College of Chiropractors of British Columbia, and shout out to CBC's Bethany Lindsay for great reporting on this. But they've decided that their practitioners can no longer advertise treatments for autism and Alzheimer's and basically a long list of other conditions. It's probably not as exhaustive as it should be, but it's a great start. Whereas in Ontario, if you are a chiropractor, you can offer treatment for autistic children, which is in essence just a skull massage. I shouldn't need to tell you that that's not going to be effective, and you know they're taking advantage of these autistic children and their parents and families as well. And where the regulatory agency is supposed to actually protect the public, what they're doing in this instance is now protecting the professionals' rights to actually practice in this way and to advertise these things to consumers. So that's all the background information. And now for the detox. So the detox, in essence, is pretty simple. It's three things. First, we need scientific oversight. We need to find a way to bring some sort of scientific oversight to the health professions. They've been operating independently and without any standards for too long. Further, we need universal standards. We shouldn't allow exemptions for products and services just because they use the magic word natural. It doesn't mean anything. You can use natural in any context. Thank you. You know, it's crazy. It's crazy. I'm passionate. But the final thing is, you know, we need you folks. We need public participation. A lot of these regulatory agencies have been designed with the public in mind, right? They're designed for us to participate. I'm not asking you to go and lobby, you know, politicians and get out on the streets and protest. But all it takes is, you know, if you see some false advertising or if you see some just crazy claims by health practitioners or by retailers of products, you know, submit a complaint. And even if the authority is not effective, at least you have documented that complaint. You can go to the media, you can take that to politicians, or you can take it to us at Bad Science Watch. So these are our goals. This is what we want to do. If you're not familiar with Bad Science Watch, I know Jonathan mentioned it briefly, we're a nonprofit that seeks to protect consumers from bad science. And feel free, anyone, to contact us. We're on the web. We have email. We have Twitter. We have Facebook. Jonathan also mentioned it already, but I also blog occasionally at posttruthhealth.ca. And I'm very active on Twitter arguing with the anti-vaxxers. And that's my talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ryan. Our last speaker before our panel discussion, so many accolades to go through. I will shrink them down for time. He holds the Canada Research Chair in Health, Law and Policy at the University of Alberta. He is a lawyer by trade, a health policy expert by day, a fierce science advocate by night, and he never sleeps. He is the author of books such as Is Gwyneth Paltrow Wrong About Everything? And its sequel, Yes. He is the host of the, I have to say, amazing documentary series, A User's Guide to Cheating Death. Yes, round of applause. Available on Netflix and Vision TV. He is quoted in the media seemingly every hour. I did 2 interviews with him just within half an hour earlier today. He will talk to us about a class of influencers who play a big role in mainstreaming bunk, as he would call it, that is, celebrities. I bring you Timothy Caulfield.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And I really want to thank the Office of Science and Society for tonight, but for everything that you've done over the last 2 decades. It really is amazing. Thank you so much. I am going to talk about celebrities because they have become an amazing part of this story. When I first started talking about celebrities, people thought it was kind of a trivial side part of the equation. Not anymore, right? Not anymore. So I want to talk about the role celebrities have had in pop culture more broadly and try to convince you that this matters. And I really do think it matters a lot because it has gotten crazy out there, right? It's gotten crazy. And speaking of crazy, my friend, Gwyneth Paltrow, right? So Gwyneth, for me, has been the gift that just keeps giving, right? Every day she says something insane. I go to, you guys know her website, Goop. I go to it every single day. And literally on that website, she'll say something bizarre. So I want to give you a sense of the kind of things that that is on Goop and the kind of things that Gwyneth pushes. This website is worth over $250 million and is becoming more and more successful every single day. But to give you a sense of what she offers, she used to have a section called Do, and it was all the things we are supposed to do to live a healthy lifestyle. And this was one of them. It's get a colonic. Everyone knows what a colonic is, right? So I actually got to interview Gwyneth's doctor in Hollywood. I can't believe he agreed to let me interview him, but he did. And he told me to do this as often as I could afford. So why are you supposed to get a colonic? You're supposed to get a colonic because it'll remove all the toxins of modern day life. That's a big thing, right, Joe? You got to remove those toxins. It eliminates all the extra mucus that you have in your intestines. Did you guys know you had extra mucus? But you do. And when it comes out, it looks like tarry black mold. Is there any evidence to support this? I give a red X, just like your X, Joe. And no, it's insane. In fact, you could perforate your bowel. It's a really bad idea. But despite this, right, it's becoming more popular. And look at this. Here's a clinic that gives colonics to kids on a near daily basis, 5-year-olds, right? For our show, we interviewed a guy that got a colonic 50 days in a row. I don't know what they're removing at that point, but he just had a divorce, and he thought that was the best way to cleanse his system, right? Really, really crazy. Now Gwyneth, she loves this region of the body, and she has a lot of products focused on colonics. She has this product. Now, I love coffee, but not this way. This is her coffee enema. Have you guys heard about this? It's called the Injectomatic. That's actually what they call her coffee enema. In Canada, it's called the Double Double. Only in Canada, right? But it's nuts, right? So you go from that kind of absurdity, you go from this nutty idea that Gwyneth, is really popularized, to this kind of situation. So this is a clinic in Ontario that wasn't cleaning its colonic instruments. And so the people who went there had to get tested for HIV and hepatitis. So you go from these kind of insane ideas to this situation, right? It is really nuts. We have this kind of stuff. Have you guys heard about this? This is Kim Kardashian and her vampire facial. We actually also interviewed a woman. We actually filmed it getting done. And the whole idea is you inject blood into the face, the vampire facial, and it's going to act as an anti-aging potion. Why is it so popular? It's popular because she is doing it, because Kim Kardashian's doing it. And by the way, yes, there are risks involved. No evidence to support it, but risks involved also. Do you see this? A very recent development that people have been infected with HIV as a result of these procedures. So you go from that kind of nutty stuff to the kind of stuff that Carly was talking about, like vaccination, right? Vaccination. And this guy, he is a celebrity. That's why he is the president of the United States, right? Let's call it what it is. And he's also an anti-vaxxer. You guys knew that, right? He's an anti-vaxxer. Now, he would say he's not. It wouldn't be a full sentence, but he'd say he's not. And he would say he's, maybe he's vaccination hesitant. But he has spouted things about the autism myth. He's also talked about the vaccination schedule. Both of those things are wrong. Does he get a red X? Let's give him a red X, right? Yeah. In fact, let's keep going. Yeah. This is the situation we are, and as Carly has pointed out, it's gotten really bad, right? We have measles outbreaks in the United States, we have them in Europe, we have them in the Philippines. This is a particularly bad one. It's gotten so bad. I don't know if you guys have heard this part. It's gotten so bad, people aren't vaccinating their pets anymore. They're not vaccinating their dogs. Have you guys heard about that? Why? Why? They're worried about dog autism, right? They're not worried about cats for some reason, right? But they're worried about dog autism. That's where we are, right? And celebrity culture has played a huge role in this, And this has led, of course, to this statement from the World Health Organization, which really highlights how important the work that Joe and his team does, right? The spreading of misinformation was identified as one of the greatest threats to public health, and I couldn't agree more. And it shows why the evening that we're having today is so important. Why? Why? How is this happening? Why do celebrities have so much influence? Well, of course, part of it is their reach, right? Part of it is they just have a big megaphone. But part of it is also this. So by the way, Tom Brady, the greatest quarterback of all time, I'm from Boston, so I have to say that. Does Tom Brady's focus on muscle pliability actually work? No, it doesn't work, right? But he is hard to argue with him because he is the greatest quarterback of all time. So he is this incredibly powerful anecdote. Often that's what celebrities are, right? They're a testimonial. So when there's a story talking about Tom Brady's diet, he's got this entire diet industry now. you're more likely to believe it because he is this powerful anecdote, this powerful testimonial, and there's evidence to back that up. In addition to that, Jenny McCarthy, I know it's hard to even look at her because it's so aggravating. This is one of her most her most famous appearances on the vaccination debate. So here she's on Larry King, and she's, by the way, she's on there with 3 experts, I believe, who were all experts that, probably spent their entire life studying vaccination, PhDs and MDs. And who do we remember? We remember Jenny McCarthy. So why is that? These are the exact quotes from her appearance there. She's talking about the autism myth. Why do we remember Jenny McCarthy? Well, of course, it's because she's a celebrity. That's a big part of the story. But in addition to that, she has a story to tell. Right? She has a story that is about her child getting autism, right? And this goes to what Carly was talking about narratives, about telling stories that will have an impact. And we know, there's research shows that a good anecdote, a good story, a good narrative will overwhelm the data. And that's exactly what is happening here. The other thing that, of course, is happening is something that is called the mere exposure effect. If you tell a story, Joe said this all the time, if you tell a story enough, it's going to resonate and people will start to believe it. And that's one of the things that celebrities do. They circulate ideas and they keep them alive. And if you're exposed to it, just merely being exposed to fake news or an idea, it seems more plausible. Did you know that's called the mere exposure effect? It's one of our cognitive biases. So this was a really interesting study done by Gordon Pennycook. He's actually a Canadian and now at Yale. And he did a study on the mere exposure effect, highlighting that that's how fake news works, right? And he found, yes, the mere exposure effect works. Just being exposed to a stupid idea makes it seem more believable. But he also found that even a single exposure can have that impact, right? So pretty amazing, right? And of course, that's why junk about vaccines on Facebook has an impact, right? That's why Russian trolls are pushing misinformation about vaccines. They know it's going to create chaos just by being exposed to this information, right? That's why we have stories like this about the same kind of thing happening in Canada. And that's why Russian trolls are even pushing misinformation about GMOs. I don't know if you heard that. Trolls are pushing misinformation. Russian trolls are pushing misinformation about GMOs because they know that just being exposed to that information is going to have an impact. Another big part of the story, of course, is trust. Trust is having an impact, and Carly touched on this too. The erosion of trust has been phenomenal, particularly with the healthcare system. Look at this study, you guys. In 1966, this is in the US, and the data in Canada is a little better, but you still see this. In 1966, nearly 73% of the population had great trust in the medical profession. And look at that, 34%. In 2012. That is a huge decrease, right? And that creates room, that creates space for the fake news and the misinformation that we're all dealing with. In addition to that, study after study has shown that people do not trust what they're seeing online. They're not trusting journalists anymore. Increasingly, people believe that they have to be worried about what they're reading, and in fact, that information might even be used for a particular agenda. So this really does matter. Why does this matter? Well, I think that all this noise that we're talking about tonight, it creates distraction and confusion from the things that we can do to live a healthy lifestyle. It creates financial loss. It creates physical harm. I think it creates public health concerns. And vaccination is just one example. But I really think it is the erosion of critical thinking that is creating the greatest damage, the greatest long-term damage. And that's why the work of the Office of Science and Society is so important, right? Because it pushes us to the future and gets at exactly what is needed, is more critical thinking. And I'm going to end with our concerns about vaccines. I mean, you think about vaccines and where we are today. Without a doubt, I think vaccines are probably the greatest single achievement of biomedicine, right? They save millions of lives every single year. And despite that reality, we see stats like this. This was a study that was done by a friend of mine, Josh Greenberg at Carleton, and his research found that 28% of Canadian parents have some degree of vaccination hesitancy because of the autism myth, right? Think about that. Over a quarter of Canadians have a degree of hesitancy because of a lie, right? So that's why we're here. That's why we're fighting, and that's why I'm going to end with my two favorite words, and that is, go science. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Timothy. I will now ask all of our speakers to grab one of these black seats at the front, and we will move on with our panel. All right. Can you guys hear me? All right, fantastic. Thank you very much to the four of you. Wonderful presentations. I heard a lot about pseudoscience, so things that look like science but that really aren't. And I would like to speak, especially to the people who have been doing this for a long time. Have you noticed an evolution in pseudoscience over the decades? Are there trends that you've picked up on that you would like to discuss?
I'd say it has increased in volume, but not necessarily in specificity. We're seeing the same kind of things that we saw when I started 40 years ago. It's just that we're seeing more and more of it. But you know, when we had Uri Geller bending his spoon, he was a big deal at that time. Now there are spoon benders everywhere, right? And we see this all over. I mean, you wonder, you know, if we have this mental ability to bend spoons by the power of the mind. I mean, you would think that this talent could be put to better use than tormenting cutlery, right? but they're still tormenting cutlery today. You know, it's just that there are more of them doing it. And we see this in every other area. We have the psychics. We always had them, but now more. And a lot of that is thanks to the internet because it makes everything so easy.
It seems to me also that maybe every 20, 25 years, something becomes very, very popular. It gets debunked. It goes away, and then it comes back. I think that we've seen this kind of resurgence of things that we use. I mean, just the anti-vaccination movement was not as big as it is now, and all of a sudden it's coming back, and people who were there, 20, 25 years ago debunking this stuff are just like, really, we're doing this again?
Well, the anti-vax movement was very big when vaccines were first introduced.
Yeah.
When Jenner first, came along, I mean, there was huge opposition to it.
Tim, you were talking about celebrity culture. Can you tell us a little bit about the differences between how celebrities will sell bunk to women versus men? And we were discussing this a little bit earlier, because now there's a trend of the dude bros in Silicon Valley, and they have their own type of pseudoscience.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting because Gwyneth Paltrow has pushed back against her critics, saying that she is responding to a need that women have. This idea that, and there's some truth to this, that women have been neglected or are not treated poorly, or have been treated poorly by the healthcare system, that they haven't been listened to, that there isn't, their needs haven't been researched, and she's exploiting that angst to sell, misinformation and to sell bunk. So you definitely have that dimension from the women's side. And the other thing I think is there's more of this blending of spirituality. It's supposed to be an integrative approach, right? This wellness, but with the guys, which is now really emerging, right? The tech community is really pushing this idea that what they're doing is cutting edge science. And Joe, I think this is another trend we're seeing, is that increasingly this bunk is being justified using scientific language. That it's quantum physics, it's regenerative, it's genomic, and that's making it more difficult to tease out the sense from the nonsense, right? I think that's a trend that I've definitely seen.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the terminology that they use. I just came across a product called Alpha Spin. If you want to take a look and be entertained, go to their website, Alpha Spin. I mean, the spin that they put on science is just amazing. The pseudo-quantum mechanical terminology and all of that. Anyway, I sent for it.
Of course you did.
I gotta have these
Of course you
things. $200 is what this is. And it looks like a coaster for a plate, but it has embedded in it quantum energy. So we'll see. It may work as well as the dots on my mattress.
Another really good example. Do you guys know the raw water trend? Did you hear this? Yeah. Like, I mean, talk about insane, right? It's out, you know, access to clean water, you know, vaccines, access to clean water, you know, probably the two greatest, you know, public health achievements ever, right? And now they're selling raw water. But how do they justify it, Joe? Based on the microbiome, right?
Yes.
That this water has healthy microbiomes, there's probiotics in it, you know, bacteria and germs that are healthy.
You talk a lot about science exploitation, right? Because so there's the stuff that's really out there that's just obviously, for us, I guess, ridiculous. But then there are things that are based on emerging research, on basic research that holds a promise. I mean, stem cells is a great area for that. But now people are sort of jumping over this gauntlet that needs to go through to make sure that it does work and we know how safe it is, to just sell you things that we're seeing in Petri dishes.
Yeah, and what's happening, I think, is, you know, we've done a lot of research on how the media portrays things like stem cells. And what often happens is they exploit the marketers. They exploit the genuine excitement around stem cells. Stem cells now is a sexy term, right? It means cutting edge. It means, you know, regeneration. And they exploit that genuine science to sell bunk. And this is interesting, too, because the scientific community deserves a little blame here, right? Because they hyped it up a lot. They hyped it up a lot, you know, and
because we need research funding.
Yeah, exactly. And Carly is 100% right. I mean, there's almost, you know, none of this stuff is ready for the clinic. And this is a field that I've worked in since 1998. I want it to work. I'm excited about it. But none of this is ready for the clinic. But these marketers have exploited that excitement, exploited that science to sell stuff that is unproven.
Actually, I'd like to ask Carly something about that. Because we've had in the Montreal Gazette for 2 days in a row now, full page ad.
He cuts them out, Carly. He cuts them out.
I do, and I pass them on to Jonathan, and he photographs them, and off they go on Twitter. They don't talk about stem cells because Health Canada is trying to curb that. So they've become regenerative cell experts. But these are full-page ads. Now, I'm in a bit of a quandary because I write for the Gazette, and people are urging me to write a column debunking this, which I will eventually have to do. What do you think about this? I mean,
yeah, it's something that I have to encounter often. I think it was a couple of months ago, Ryan sent me something. The Globe and Mail had a big article or big ad from the chiropractors, you know, talking about defending their profession. And the Globe ran an investigation into all of the problems with chiropractor. The chiropractor college is basically run by people who are complete, you know, the vitalists, right? The people who just believe in complete nonsense. And Ryan can explain more about that. But, you know, so the problem is sort of, it's insidious. So for the journalists, I mean, I can't comment specifically on that particular thing, but I've encountered it in other ways. I mean, we are separate from the advertisements that we run, of course. I mean, and I've never, you know, a lot of people accuse us of this, but I can say on the record, I've never, ever had anyone from advertising or an editor say, you have to say this because of an advertiser, that kind of thing. That doesn't go on. That's a myth. But I think that there is a problem when you see something, when you turn the page of a major newspaper. I used to write for the Montreal Gazette. I used to interview Joe when I worked there, and I've interviewed Joe like more recently as well. But, you know, and you do see these ads being run, and it's a problem because does that mean are we legitimizing that? You know? Thank you. It's different. I mean, you know, and I'm in a difficult spot, right? Because, you know, I work for the Globe and Mail. I work for one of these newspapers, and when I see some of these things, I shake my head and I say, well, why are we doing this? I mean, is this, are we giving this the okay? And there's so much of this that goes on, whether it's anything to do with stem cells or it's naturopathy. I mean, I go out for drinks with friends and they tell me about the IV injections, the therapies that they're getting from their naturopath, and, you know, they're a little tired and this is going to help them, and, you know.
You only go out once with them.
Yeah, oh no, we're not friends anymore. But it's everywhere, and, you know, I think that journalists have to do a better job, and I think that the one benefit, I mean, what, you know, again, like of things like the measles outbreak is that we're talking more about this in the newsroom. I mean, I think a couple of years ago, I was actually told by an editor to contact an anti-vaccination parent for balance in a story, and that would not happen today. You know, things have changed, and I think things need to change more. So hopefully that answers that question. But I do think the media, we can do a better job on a number of fronts.
There's yes, for sure. There's an even more insidious way, though, that ads are finding themselves in newspapers, and that's through sponsored content. I don't know if you guys are aware of this.
Sponsored content.
Yeah. Do you want to talk about it a little bit?
I would love to talk about native advertising.
Yes.
So if you're not familiar with native or sponsored advertising, it's a type of advertising that appears essentially within the paper or within the site or the social media page of the media organization, and it's stylized to resemble an actual news article. And of course, different organizations have different standards for this type of advertising. Usually it's a tiny disclaimer, or actually in some cases it's a different font, but who recognizes a different font in advertising? I don't know how that began.
I know my Arial from my Times New Roman, Ryan. I'm insulted that you would think otherwise.
Well, I'm impressed.
Thank you.
But not all of us are font experts. And so how I first came across it was in the Globe and Mail, and it was an article put on by a chiropractic association, and the claim was something along the lines of CEO sees the future of chiropractic in remedying in everything, but this specifically was taking on the opioid crisis.
Right.
And the CEO was the CEO of a chiropractic association, and they're not even a regulatory association. Their goal is to promote the profession. So that was troubling to say the least.
Tim, you were mentioning the fact that women traditionally have not been served all that well by the medical establishment. This is another example where there's a real crisis, there's an opioid crisis, and now you're seeing these pseudoscientists and pseudo-doctors coming in and saying, we've got the solution.
Yeah, they're taking advantage of it. You're seeing naturopaths do this also. I think the chiropractic community is one of the most vocal in that space. And that it does make it more difficult to combat it. I'm sure you've fought this too. I don't know if you've seen this when you speak out against it. They say, "Oh, what? You're for opioids now?" It's like it's the same thing you hear with pharmaceutical industry. If you say something against homeopathy, that means you're for big pharma, right? So it really does make the battle a little bit more difficult.
Carly, you've had a real impact. Your reporting changed an actual event, got somebody deplatformed. Is that a fair thing to say?
Yes, that's a fair thing to say.
Why do you think that happened? What is the power of journalism?
This is interesting. So are you familiar, guys, with the Total Health Show and Del Bigtree being kicked out of the Toronto conference a couple of months ago? So that's it in a nutshell. I mentioned it earlier. Basically, big name anti-vaxxer coming to Toronto to give a talk. A reader tipped me off. We wrote about it. He was kicked out of the conference. And what's interesting is, there's always a backstory. And so what happened is that I tried to contact the conference organizers and was unsuccessful. And to this day, I've never been able to actually contact anyone from the conference or connect with them. But they immediately basically ejected him from the event. Now, we had mentioned that this event had a couple of sponsors, and there was some organic store in Toronto. And so we wrote about how, and this is not a small store, I can't remember, on Healthy Planet, and anyway, they have a bunch of locations. I had never heard of them before. I'm not in that space. But I had written something about the fact that, they said that they weren't going to be sponsoring it anymore. Like they kind of were distancing themselves, but they weren't. And then when the story ran, they went berserk, and I was getting contacted by their PR person basically saying, you need to tell everybody that, we were still going to be a sponsor, but that we're not for this guy, but we're not against him either. And I'm like, oh, so you're getting backlash from your anti-vaccination sort of clientele. And so I guess the interesting part there is that, there is still this, despite what we wrote, despite what we ran, like there is this very alive and well movement, and thousands of people out there. Like this business was legitimately afraid of what would happen to them if they were seen as coming out against this anti-vaccination guy. And this is a store that they've got tons of franchises. They're a big name, and they were really trying to align themselves in a very subtle way with this anti-vaccination guy. So that doesn't answer your question at all, but I guess, but the end of it is, no matter what we write about, it doesn't go away because the Globe and Mail is part of the problem. I apparently am on the board of Pfizer. I'm Satan.
Did you get your check this month?
Yeah, well,
mine
now
was
that
a little bit late.
Yeah, now that I'm part of the Illuminati, it's actually gone up. So, but, and it's sad, but it is true. Places like the Globe and Mail used to be sort of respected, and now the people that know and trust us still do. But people, if you want to choose your own adventure news-wise, you go for it. And you can just tune us out.
Carly, how much do you think that, because that was a great story, and I actually used it as an example of how we can make a difference. The social media world, the Go Science team, really got on board, right? And how much do you think that has an impact? I mean, that's the way that people in the audience can have an impact. When they see a story like that, get on social media, tag other people, create momentum the same way the anti-vax people do.
I actually think that,
Subscribe.
yeah, like what Tim is saying, I think that is probably the best thing, for people that are sort of really frustrated and saying, what can we do? I think it is about a critical mass, so the stories that, like I wrote about the anti-vaccine billboards, this was a pretty big story a few months ago, and I was just shocked. Like I was shocked. I actually went in downtown Toronto to find these billboards, and I had heard they were outside the Eaton Centre. And I wrote that in my story, that they were outside the Eaton Centre. The Eaton Centre called us to complain that we're not associated with these people at all. Anyway, the billboards got taken down after we wrote our story, and the story went viral. Might have been the biggest story I've ever had, like in terms of our metrics and views. The health minister's commenting on it and that kind of a thing. And the overwhelming message that came out of that story is that this is irresponsible, vaccines work, this is crazy, take them down. It wasn't, oh, let's stoke a debate about vaccines. And I think part of it is the way we told the story. We did not repeat anything that was in the billboards. And back in the day, we might have, we weren't repeating the false narrative. But for anyone who's wondering how you make a difference, I think that is how. You start to join those messages. You get on board. You have these conversations. I've had members of my family come to me and say, well, after my son was born, make sure you don't get him a flu shot, because I know someone whose son got a flu shot. He was never the same. And I sort of nodded and smiled because I had given birth 5 days ago and just couldn't believe we were having this conversation. Today, I might say, you know what, that's just not true. Like, I appreciate your feedback, but, we can be respectful, of people's opinions and point out that they're wrong at the same time.
Yeah, let's give that. There is a really interesting dance. So I think I've told you this story before. So I was part of that, the discussion around those billboards, and it was, I was in the media, and I think maybe you interviewed me.
Oh yeah, I need guys like Tim. Yeah.
So I tweeted it. It was very active on my Twitter feed. And then when they were taken down, I said, this is great, a really good example of how the team can get together, the Go Science team can make a difference. And then I got a message from an individual who was part of the organization putting the billboards up. And he said, thank you for the exposure, and thank you for helping me get my message out. So it really, and I saved that, it really can be a dance. Like it really, my philosophy, and I think we've talked about this before, is you can't let that scare you away. Because I think long term, maybe you create these blips, but long term, I think you set the record straight. And you always err on the side of saying what the science really says.
I'll add in really briefly that I think for years, that's what media and public health did. We were too afraid. Yeah. You engage them, you make them famous. And so after those billboards were published, this group was saying online, like, congratulations, guys, we did it. Everyone, we had so many impressions and blah, blah, blah. I really think, though, when you look at the internal metrics we have at the Globe, we track, readership and eyeballs. And I looked at who was sharing the story on Facebook. You can click on the shares. And a lot of people were adding comments like this is sickening, this is terrible. The overwhelming number of people that are sharing these things are saying, this is wrong. And so I encourage everyone to kind of get on board.
You were speaking about the power of social media. I mean, Georgian College in Ontario used to have a 3-year homeopathy program. You tweeted about this, got some media coverage, and then they canceled it. Yeah. So there is real power there.
And I think we can all be part of that, right?
We're all trying to mobilize the troops, right?
Yeah.
But the trouble that I think we have is that the scientific community doesn't always want to be mobilized. They're not always interested in it. Those of us who are in this business of communicating, of course, we are out there attacking the billboards. But I can tell you that most of my colleagues here at McGill, who do research and teach, are not particularly interested in that. Most of them would not know what homeopathy is because it's not in their world, and it's very difficult to mobilize them because they're still the ivory tower where you're interested in just doing your research, and this is where it's very difficult to get them to try to be active in these worldly things outside of their own narrow world.
Well, one of the excuses that I've heard from scientists, for example, because there's a very interesting relationship between journalists and scientists, as I'm sure you're aware. Scientists really care about accuracy. And they will ask, for example, the journalist, can you send me the draft of your article before you publish it so I can check that there are no mistakes in there? The journalist says, I can't do this. And sometimes I've heard from a number of scientists saying, the article went to print, there were glaring mistakes in this, I'm never doing this again. Is there a solution to this, Carly?
I think there is one solution, which is that more scientists need to learn how to talk to media. And this is, of course, journalists need to get things right. We'll talk about them in a second because, I already said we can improve in a number of ways. But I've interviewed people on a number of occasions who they do speak in jargon. It's very complicated, and you're talking about complex ideas, and you're trying to distill them down. And so it's not surprising that people get it wrong, especially in a media landscape where, I know of a media outlet that's having a lot of trouble right now, and they're getting some pushback from some doctors that are really angry with them for getting all this stuff wrong, but they don't have a dedicated health reporter anymore. And so, this is part of the new world that we're living in. And so, I think that it's really important to get these messages out. And so we have to figure out ways to do it. I know in some places they place a real premium on this. They get their scientists and doctors media trained. Here's how you get your message out, And there's a lot of times I'll contact an expert and they might wonder why their name doesn't appear in a story. It's because they were completely unquotable. Nothing they said, made sense. They didn't speak in full sentences. They didn't get any point across. And it is an art to talk to the media. And so, I talk to health professionals a lot about this, and I implore them to understand that, if you want the public to understand something, you can't shake your head and say, oh, stupid, ignorant masses. You're part of the problem. We're only as good as the people who pick up the phone and talk to us. Like, when I email Tim, he picks up, he gets back to me right away, or like
even
fairly.
In the cab, on the way to another interview.
Recently I was interviewing Tim for a story, we were both in the same conference center. I'm hunched over on the floor typing a story, and he's wandering around about to be, he'd just given a keynote, making that impression. And so I always tell this anecdote because I think it's really telling. Michael Gardam used to be the head of infection prevention and control at the University Health Network, which is the biggest health network in Canada. And he said, when a journalist calls, he's the guy that basically oversaw a lot of the stuff that was going on during SARS, and Toronto was sort of ground zero during all of that, and a lot of other high-profile things, the H1N1 pandemic. And he said, when a journalist calls, if I'm in a meeting or whatever I'm doing, I stop and I answer that phone because they're talking to thousands of people. I can't get my message out. This is the power that we have, and so whether it's engaging just with me or with different social media channels, there is a real importance to actually figuring out how to convey yourself effectively to media. If I'm working on something really complicated, if someone says, send me a draft, I say no, but if I'm confused about a topic, I might send you a couple lines. Can you get back to me by 4 o'clock, by 5 o'clock? And so I'll say, Dr. So-and-so, or, here's the 2 lines, can you just tell me if there's anything wrong? And so that's how sometimes we work around that. And journalists also, again, we do need to do a better job, but we've got our own battles to fight.
When I call Tim, or I email, I always get the message, I'm traveling now, I don't know where I can.
And then he answers you within 5 minutes.
But nevertheless, 5 seconds later, the answer comes.
So we've actually studied how messages get wrong in the media. And so we've actually studied, particularly in the context of hype. And it's not the media. It's the press release, and it is the quotes from the scientists. So there's empirical evidence to back up exactly what you're saying.
I think when we're talking about battling misinformation in the context of vaccine misinformation, we need to fight fire with fire. Like, the vaccine anti-vax advocates are very effective. They have great messaging.
They work at it.
They work at it. They mobilize people, and we should stop expecting scientists and medical professionals to be the ones who are leading the battle, so to speak. The anti-vax advocates are they're lay people. They don't have any specific expertise for the most part. So they're largely ignorant to the science, but they're very effective. What if we had our own group of slightly less ignorant lay people? I'm not a scientist currently. I have a PhD. It's largely just a label at this point, but I'm not a medical professional. There are ways to get involved, and I'm not an expert on many of the things I talk about, but I know to listen to the experts, and I know how to spread the messages, and I know how to look into the information, and I know what needs to be done. And I think a lot of people could get involved with really limited experience and limited scientific knowledge.
I think we also need the experts to understand that they need to think about how to communicate their work. And the same way that the alternative practitioners and the chiropractors who do their practice building seminars and all of this, they work at this, on what is the way to get the message across, what are the best words to use. When is it ever that in the scientific community we have discussions like that, among researchers? And let's say, what is the best way that I can get, people talking about the work that I do? It doesn't happen.
Okay, so that's education. Let's move into regulation. Are we at the point where we need mandatory childhood immunization?
Yes.
Thank you. Next question. I want to hear your opinions on this very prickly topic.
Sounds like no one wants to touch it.
I tend to agree. But I think that we need to be careful what we mean by mandatory, right? And how, because I think even that word mandatory can mobilize anti-vaxxers in the sense it's the big government holding my kid down and forcing them to have. So I like to say we need more, we need stronger we need stronger vaccination policy. I think that's a good way to frame it. We've seen that work in California, we've seen it work in other jurisdictions, but I also think that we need to do all the little things. We need to make sure that convenience isn't keeping people from getting access. Maybe there's a single mom and she can't get her kid vaccinated. We need to take away all those barriers too. And I also think we need to listen to what the concerns are. Not everyone's a hardcore anti-vaxxer, right? In fact, they're a small cohort. We need to listen to what people's concerns are and address them. But yes, I agree, we need stronger vaccination policy.
Yeah, I mean, it may very well play into their messaging. It's hard always to imagine all the consequences to those types of regulatory changes. There are already all kinds of anti-vaxxer memes about vaccine police. And if you give them vaccine police, they're just going to go crazy. And it's hard to know what the consequences are.
I know that Noni MacDonald, who's a very prolific vaccine expert, and she's always, every time I contact her, she's in Geneva talking to the WHO. She's spoken publicly saying it is a very controversial idea. It can backfire, so we need to be careful about it. I kind of tend to be divided depending on, the expertise. I rely a lot on the people that I talk to, so it's hard for me to say one way or another. But one thing I will say is that we do a terrible job in Canada of even tracking who's being vaccinated and where and what's going on. I mean, in Ontario, we're one of the only provinces with the school-based requirements for vaccination. Some of the data that's coming out, again, incomplete. We need way more and better data, but it's disturbing. And you can actually pinpoint areas where people aren't being vaccinated. So what's going on in the rest of Canada? Why don't we know? At the very basic level, let's forget mandatory for a second. Why can't we just even figure out who's getting vaccinated and who's not and why?
Very good. Ryan, you recently wrote about the fact that you no longer think that chiropractors can self-regulate. And you were talking a little bit about this in your talk. How did you come to the conclusion that this system isn't working? And what is the alternative when it comes to alternative medical practitioners? Because, for example, here we have naturopaths. They don't have a professional order. You move west of here, they all have professional orders in the other provinces. So how did you come to the conclusion that they just can't self-regulate?
That is a number of complex questions. I think we're going to need a bit of background. Okay, perfect. Let's go. So chiropractic is a really interesting profession when it comes to regulation and issues of pseudoscience. One of the big problems is not every chiropractor is a chiropractor. There are very distinct philosophies within the profession. So you kind of have a continuum, a spectrum of different philosophies ranging from actually more reasonable kind of evidence-based practitioners, Tim might disagree, who are akin to physical therapists who specialize in the spine and back and what have you. And then at the other end of the spectrum, you have practitioners who believe that they're literally channeling a healing force through the spine. And so they think that they can treat virtually any condition. And the problem is that we're in a place where we have a single regulator that takes care of all of these practitioners. And at the regulatory level, it's actually become a battlegrounds for the philosophies, right? Because the people who are more in the evidence-based camp, they recognize that the quacks, we'll say, are hurting the reputation of the profession and are putting people's health at risk. And of course, the quacks don't want to be forced to regulate better. They want to keep practicing as they've been practicing. over the last couple of years, I've kind of watched this battle take place in Ontario and in other provinces, and I've kind of been a part of that by submitting a large number of complaints against practitioners for issues ranging from treating outside of their scope, like offering treatments for autistic children, or claiming that vaccines are the #1 toxin. That's a popular message among these types of chiropractors, because they believe that the spine is the conduit to health, and everything else is just treating the symptoms or is an unnecessary and dangerous medical procedure. And so I've watched how the college has, the regulatory college has dealt with these complaints, and the reality is that they just haven't been acting in the interest of the public. They've been acting in a way that protects these types of practitioners and protects the most egregious practices and crazy beliefs. And it's at the point now where I think what we need is a political intervention, and we need to get rid of the old school practitioners from the regulator. The next step is not entirely clear. I mean, my dream would be having some sort of regulatory agency, kind of akin to Health Canada, that regulates science at a national level, and complaints could then be appealed to them if they're not satisfactorily dealt with at the regulatory college. But it's a complex issue, and of course part of the issue is that all of the health professions are regulated independently and uniquely within each province. So there are a lot of intricacies. It's a complex issue.
Carly, you were sharing in your talk some lovely tweets that you got. Has the pushback toward the kind of work that you guys do, has the pushback gotten worse over the years, or has it just maintained? What is the balance of good comments versus nasty ad hominems and threats and those kinds of things?
Right. I would say it's gotten worse, and I think that places like Twitter, which didn't exist, however many years ago, really aided that. And I think that the people who are part of this movement, whatever it might be, anti-vaccination, or there's also been a lot of the pro-gun lobby that's been filling up my feed lately, and they know how to use these platforms. They know how to use them well, and they push back, and they're mean, and sometimes it does even get to me, the volume of them, and some of the things that they say. You're almost kind of worried. I know of some public health officials in Ontario that had to actually call the police because they were being threatened, actually over the issue of mandatory vaccination, from online threats. So it is kind of scary sometimes. But I think that overall, you hear more negative, but the silent majority, people aren't necessarily going to write to you always and say, I agree with you, good job. It's the people that are really angry and whipped up that are going to contact you. I tend to think that the overall great comments just aren't necessarily being expressed. The people are sort of nodding their heads, and it's this angry minority that are reaching out, and so, you just kind of have to move on from that. And, a good example was the mother that I'd referenced earlier in my presentation, Jill Promoli, whose son died from the flu. I wrote about her recently, and I talked to Tim for this, and that's so her child died in 2016, and just what a nightmare. And she's been attacked recently for promoting vaccinations. She has a group called For Jude for Everyone, and recently hundreds of people flocked to her page to attack her, and she said, I'll never back down. Nothing will hurt more than losing a son, and I'll never stop spreading this message. So if she can do it, I can certainly do it.
I think it is getting worse, and I actually did a study of my hate mail. Did you know that? Yeah. So
I think I saw a video of you reading some of your hate mail.
I've got the reading, but I actually did a study. I took 300. I worked with one of my research associates, and we did a study of 300 bits of hate mail that I got, and it was a really interesting exercise because the themes are so similar, no matter what the topic is.
Shill accusations.
Yeah, it's first you're an idiot, right? And then it's the public trust. You've been bought out by big pharma, and then there's more about how we don't trust science anymore, and it's almost always the same, right? So I think that's really interesting. And the other interesting thing is how incredibly mobilized they are. It goes what you said, Joe. I mean, these people work at what they're doing, right? I got in a fight with Deepak Chopra. Remember that?
Yes.
And he said some nasty things about me. And then the hate rains down, right? It just rains down. It's still raining down. I'm still getting Chopra rain today, right? and they're mobilized, right? And they care. And I think we have to think that way a little bit ourselves. We have to be. Now it's interesting because you don't want to become part of the polarization discourse, right? I think what we want to be is kind of a positive energy on social media. We don't want to be.
Deepak would agree with
yeah,
this.
exactly. Yeah, it is ironic that Deepak Chopra was the
down
cause,
negative
yeah,
energy,
of
yes.
all the hate that I've received.
Well, I would say that the shill comments have always been there. What has not, and what's been more now, is that they're much more active through the Information Act, so that they
FOIA
want our
requests.
emails. And this
Yeah,
is
I
something
agree with
that we've had. I've had the food babe, want all my emails, which is welcome to have. She's looking for any connection to Monsanto or Dow or whatever. But you know why those companies don't? The big pharma doesn't come out with new drugs all the time. Because they're spending all their money buying us off as shills. So anyway, and so that has been more and more that they're requesting our emails, and that and the other one is the U.S. Right to Know. The U.S. Right to Know is an absolutely foul organization, and they will go after anyone who says anything positive about genetic modification. And they'll want to dig through your emails, and they'll publicize you, and they have no qualms about that. I mean, the food babe has her new book out, and she's made some rather uncomplimentary comments about most of us.
But you're not in the book, unfortunately.
I am.
You are in the book.
I am,
You
I
are.
am. Yeah.
Congratulations.
I'm actually in the introduction.
Oh wow.
Because I'm shilling for Monsanto.
Very prestigious position.
Yeah.
We're going to take questions from the audience in just a couple minutes, so start thinking about what you want to ask. But just to wrap things up, the most frequent question that I get when I give talks is, how do we deal with all this misinformation? I'm not sure I know whom to trust anymore. Is there an easy solution? I'm guessing the answer is no. But what are some pathways? Yes, there's us, but we can't cover everything. What do you tell people when they tell you this? When they ask you, whom can I trust anymore when I want accuracy, especially on scientific and health issues?
Well, I want to say one thing. You can't trust nonprofits. You can't trust. Sorry. They're the worst. Just in general, obviously there are good nonprofits like Bad Science Watch who are trying to do good work, but a lot of these organizations that spread misinformation and have really nefarious intents, they have really good branding and they're hiding behind that. Joe just mentioned the U.S. Right to Know. Like the organization is called Right to Know, but they're an anti-GMO organization. But it's hard to get that just from the brand. And there are all kinds of anti-vaccine organizations now that recognize that it's a polarized issue, and that the public perception, I think, at large is turning against the anti-vaxxers. I hope. And so you can't find an organization that calls themselves anti-vax. There are organizations that brand themselves as vaccine choice or informed consent, and so they look reliable, they look legitimate, but they're not. They're very deceptive. So
They never call themselves like the demonic anti-vaccination league.
no, they should. We need better regulation.
Yes, we do.
None of them are anti-vaccination, right? They're all just pro-health and anti-injury.
Yeah. Final question. I'd like to get all of you to chime in, starting with Carly. What can people do, people in this room, people watching at home, what can they do to help us do our job?
Okay, this is an easy one. Subscribe to a newspaper. You just set me right up for that. I'm being a bit facetious, but it is a sad reality that journalism is under siege. Part of that might be our own doing. We weren't nimble and innovative enough. We're trying to catch up, but journalists. I go to work every day trying to uncover things that people don't want you to know about, and try and bring those truths home. And I can't think of another organization, who's we talk about how nonprofits, it's hard to know who to trust. Journalists are supposed to be those people, and there's very few of us left. So that's one thing we can do. And the other thing is just be as educated as you can. Everyone's busy. No one has time for anything. So, do a couple of extra searches. Don't believe everything that you read. Be sort of I think that we need more media literacy, and I'm not sure how we do that. Is it a course they need to teach in elementary school? Probably. But let's all work at that.
Tim?
I'm going to steal a little bit of Ryan. Your presentation was awesome, by the way, and I agree with you. I think we need more people complaining and becoming. So many of these regulatory tools, right, are complaint driven. So people can work to become part of the answer that way. And the other thing we've already talked about, and this is obvious, I think we all need to be engaged. It is a tough battle. But we can be like a Go Science team, right? We can be a community that supports each other, and that really helps. So that's what I would suggest.
So Tim stole my thunder a bit, so I'll say, no, it's okay, I'm prepared. I'll say just ask, just get online, shoot, I mean, you'll probably get your email bounced back from Tim, or it'll say he's traveling, but shoot me an email. If you want to get involved and participate, just reach out and ask, get in touch. I mean, a lot of us are pretty, well, I shouldn't speak for everyone. I'm pretty available to talk to anyone who's interested in advocacy in this area. Joe?
I'm going to saw the branch I'm sitting on. I say write letters to the Gazette. Say that these ads, these giant ads that they're running every day are not science-based, and ask that they be more critical. Make a phone call to CJD. Say that running a program like Coast to Coast overnight is not acceptable. This is full of conspiracy theorists, full of anti-vaxxers. They harm the public, and radio stations should not be harming the public.
A warm round of applause to our panelists. Emily, I see you over there. Do we have microphones for the audience? We do have them here. So Ada and Emily will each have a microphone. I would like you to raise your hand if you have a question, and please be succinct. And out of respect for our panelists, no long comments. Please ask an actual question. There will be time afterwards if you want to chat with our speakers, I'm sure. So there's a question at the back over there that I saw there. So we have a question here. Yes. Hello, Sana.
Hi. So I see here quite a variety of people sitting, but what we don't see is actually people from pharma. So my question is there a role for pharma companies in trying to tackle pseudoscience? Because they seem to be a bit of a black box.
Is there a role for the pharmaceutical companies to combat pseudoscience?
I'll take a piece of that. I think it's really tough. We've actually done research on this, and if big pharma is involved, public trust deteriorates, rightly or not. So I actually think that we need to figure out a way. Look, we live in a market economy. If we want to translate science to the public, the industry has to be involved. We may not like that, but that's the reality. So I actually think we need to figure out a way that we can involve industry in a manner that's trustworthy. Because look, there is evidence. There's no doubt about it. I think we need to recognize this, that industry has had an impact on the science. It has had an impact on how knowledge has been translated, right? It has had those conflicts. So I think we have to figure out a way that we can engage industry as a partner that still maintains public trust, and it's not going to be easy. Yeah.
Do we have a question on this side? Emily, I'll let you choose.
Thank you. Thank you. Unfortunately, every profession has its share of charlatans. I'll harken you back to the ClimateGate scandal not so many years ago, about a decade ago, which brought this out. Unfortunately, many of the top scientists who advocate the wrong things are fantastic communicators. It just happens to be that way. And it's impossible to distinguish between the advocates and the adversaries in any profession. What can the profession do itself to self-filter in such a field where there's tremendous amounts of specialization, in your opinions?
Anybody wants to grab that?
I often think that one thing that can be done, it seems to me, again, coming from as a communicator, and I'm not in sort of the public relations space where I'm, part of a university promoting things, but it often seems as though, when we get a pitch, for instance, oh, there's this new thing that's coming out, you might want to attend, it's almost like an afterthought. We spent all this time developing something, writing a report, whatever it might be, and then we spent like 10 seconds just like shooting an email to journalists, and we just are going to spam them and hope something sticks. So I think that maybe what needs to be done is spending a little bit more time trying to be a little bit more thoughtful about the stories that are being conveyed and communicating. We often hear this idea of like it's the social media is left up to the intern, to sort of figure out, and I think maybe turn that on its head. Make those sorts of things, those public-facing messages, more of the priority. Spend more money on making sure that the communications that's going out is good. Get someone who knows how to tell stories and figure out how to tell them. Someone like a public relations professional who goes in, interviews the doctors, distills something. I have a former colleague of mine, Paul Taylor, who works at Sunnybrook, and he writes this column like the patient navigator. So he basically, his job is to, talk to the experts and answer complex questions. So maybe that's one idea that could be applied more broadly.
Question on this side of the room, yes.
Okay, hi. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yeah.
So I had a question that's slightly a bit less related to what we directly talked about, but talking about social media, they're like a huge platform for fake news to spread and everything. And I think there's been a lot of talking recently about how they can choose with their algorithm what comes up first, and then they can influence our whole life and like what we choose to do with everything. So I was wondering if like you think that is a way to like control what comes up first, and like should actually governments get involved with the social media to choose what should be actually spread and what should not, or is this completely interfering with like freedom of speech?
Slippery slope there.
I'll start us off.
Go for it.
I think at very least we should demand more transparency, and I don't see a way to do that that doesn't involve outside intervention. So I mean, we should at very least have an understanding of how the algorithms on different platforms are targeting certain information and using our own personal information to tailor what it suggests and what it shows to us, because right now we really have limited insight into that. And so I think that the first step, especially before we decide to do anything drastic, would be to understand what's going on.
We're running short on time. 2 more questions. We have one over here.
Oh, thank you everyone for such a wonderful evening. And I think OSS is doing a wonderful work in your different ways. Dr. Schwarcz has been very prolific with so many publications. Jonathan Jarry is bringing fresh blood with his cracked science. But it seems to me that we are this evening preaching to the convert. Now all these people here already have, it's kind of mental set that we are fighting for. Probably the next step that I saw coming here is the project carriers, the young people who had projects. But I talked to some of them, but it seems to me that they still need some coaching. They still need, they are the people to target. We are moving from science. Well, one thing is we have to work bottom up. We've been working top down from McGill OSS. Now we have to go down to the schools, elementary schools, maybe from Dr. Schwartz, big books, to short stories for kids with the images, with we have to go pedagogic about it. And the other thing maybe is investing in projects like the ones you have here. Very. I'm
going to cut you off just so we can move on to the final question. But
sorry.
What are we doing with children and with schools and with the educational system? I mean, that's a tough nut to crack.
Well, this is something that we've been trying to do for a long time, because it's always been my contention that you teach kids how to think, not what to think. And we've made lots. we made lots of efforts in school. I mean, I will often, in elementary school, talk about what peer-reviewed publication is and how we know what we know and why something in New England Journal is more valuable than a National Enquirer. And it's possible to get that across to kids. So, but I mean, you're quite right. And of course, in terms of preaching to the choir, I mean, we talk about this all the time. You know, I mean, when we sent out the invitation to this event, we did not say only fans are welcome, right? And so we'd welcome the alternate people. Or any here?
But I would say, before we go to the last question, but I would say there is value to preaching to the choir, because you guys can take our message and reach the people that we cannot reach directly. You have relatives, you have friends, you have coworkers. These are people that we may not be able to reach, but you can reach them through the content and the things that you learn from us. So that's valuable as well. I'm sorry, I have.
OSS is the Office for Science and Society.
Yes.
It seems to me that the focus has been on medicine, on pharmacy. Could we do something about society? And here I go to the social topics, the
We will keep that in mind. We have time for one last question, which is at the back over there.
Okay, I'll keep it brief.
You have to ask the greatest question in all of humanity.
So have you ever converted on an individual basis someone of an opposing view, like family or friend, and how have you done it?
Well done, sir. Well done. Have you been able to convince somebody who believed something that was anti-scientific, and how did you do it?
If it's a close friend or relative, keep quiet.
I can't remember if I have done it specifically, but I do know that what does work. There's a guy that I know you might be familiar with, Olivier Bernard, Le Pharmacien. Anyway, he does the kind of work that we do on the French side. And he's come up with a bit of an algorithm, because he's also a pharmacist, and he does have to speak to people who may have questions about homeopathy, all that kind of stuff. And so the algorithm that he has is, first of all, listen to the person. And you say, tell me more. And you may know what they're about to say, you may know what their arguments are, but you're building a relationship of trust with the other person. You're showing that you're willing to listen to them, and that's very, very important. And then you say, I agree with you on this thing, because you might not completely disagree. You might agree on something. You know, somebody might have fears about the pharmaceutical industry. You might say, you know, I get where you're coming from. There have been some shady stuff done by pharma. I get where you're coming from. That being said, and now you bring in the actual science. Because if you just hit people with facts in an attempt to destroy them, which is very popular on YouTube, all you do is you show that you are right, but you're not convincing anybody that you are right. And if you want to convince, if you want to persuade, you have to listen to the other person. You have to build a relationship of trust, and you have to meet them where their values are. If you're talking about GMO food, you have to ask the other person, what do you want in your food supply? Oh, you want it to be safe, you want it to be cheap, you want it to be nutritious. I want the same things as you. We're on the same side of this debate. So let's find answers together. And these conversations, I think, are a lot easier to have in person than it is on Twitter, which is why I'm a big fan of Twitter. Twitter has its uses. We've accomplished amazing things with Twitter. But you know, at the end of the day, it's still two human beings in a room building a relationship of trust and having a conversation. And we need to do more of that stuff. So thank you for the question. All right. Thank you to our panel. And we will close things off with our director. But before you do, I have to change the slides. And you guys are in for a little treat. It was not announced. And please, on your way out, we have rubber ducks outside.
Polyvinyl chloride ducks.
Yes, thank you. PVC ducks. Grab one, otherwise we're going to have a storage problem. Thank you.
Well, first of all, of course, thank you for attending. But as you can imagine, it takes quite an effort to put on an event like this. It takes more organizing than you can imagine. It starts weeks and weeks and weeks ahead. And this event could not have happened were it not for two people who deserve just as much accolade as all of us here. And Ada McQueen, where are you? Where is she? Ada has done a wonderful job helping organize it, and she also put together the timeline that you see posted outside of our office, which might be a very interesting thing to look at. She's also worked very hard at doing the liquid nitrogen ice cream. There's still going to be some. There will be some liquid nitrogen ice cream and also some demonstrations in the lab if you care to see them, and you should care to see them. And certainly, this event would absolutely not have happened without Emily. Thank you. And if you open it, you'll understand why the flowers are a certain color. I've been influenced by a lot of people throughout my career. Sherlock Holmes has certainly been one of them, because I think that that is one of the most appropriate quotes for science, because it's timeless. We see this all the time, people trying to fit their, quote, facts into theories that they have. So a lot of the stuff that we do certainly has been influenced by Sherlock Holmes. And as many of you know, it's quite a curiosity that the creator of Sherlock Holmes, Conan Doyle, who created the most scientific detective in fiction, himself was a spiritualist and believed in the spirit world and believed in ghosts. So we're going to go back for just a moment to the 1800s, which was the heyday of spiritualism. And this was when they thought that, ghosts and spirits were real. And I've been often criticized for doing demos without glasses, so I will not do that. And spirits and magic tie together very well, because, as you know, many people today expect magic. I mean, Jonathan spoke about this, that this is the expectation. People want miraculous things to happen. So I thought we would make a spirit appear, a ghost appear, because you'd like that, right? Okay, so why don't we do that? Not that close. There we go. Now, there's someone else that really has had a great deal of influence, not only on what I've done scientifically, but for the world as a whole, and that was Michael Faraday, who I would argue is probably the greatest scientist who has ever lived. If you take a look at everything that he did, from physics to electricity to chemistry, he probably has had more of an impact than anyone else. He invented the electric motor, he invented electrolysis, he identified elements, extracted elements from numerous things. I mean, if you ever want to read fascinating stories, read about Michael Faraday. But one thing that people don't know about Faraday is that he was also a debunker. He was very strong in promoting science. And he was very disturbed when the spiritualists and the mediums claimed that they could contact the other world. And in the 1800s, mediums would have seances, and Faraday would lecture about how they did some of these tricks. His Friday night lectures at the Royal Institute in London were exemplary, talked about all kinds of things, chemistry, and also described how the spiritualists carried out some of their miracles. Because for the spiritualists to show that they really had a contact with the other world, they had to show some kind of spiritual manifestation. Levitations were a big deal. Levitation. If a spiritualist could demonstrate levitation, then it meant that the spirits were there, because this was against the laws of nature. Ducks, as you know, cannot fly, right? Not this kind, anyway. But Let's see. We're back in the 1800s, and Michael Faraday is going to demonstrate the presence of spirit. Down. Ducks can fly. But what we do through our office, we try to control their flight. And we do this in various ways. We, of course, try to separate sense from nonsense. But we also do videos of all kinds. And I hope many of you have seen this because this has been one of our greatest accomplishments. This is Jonathan's masterpiece. And it's a video that was seen by more people than anything else that McGill has ever produced. 15 million people watched this very short video, and I think you'll get the idea why. I think you see why it has garnered so much attention and so many millions of people have viewed this. I'd like to thank the panelists once more. I think they did a wonderful job with their talks and discussions. And of course, I thank you. And I also want to mention that we have coated my levitating table with a chemical that is so toxic that if you touch it, you will die. And on your way out, if you're interested, pick up one of our little duckies because we do have enough of them. And remember to always separate sense from nonsense and just say no to the quacks.